I used to believe that Thanksgiving was the one day no one in America could feel invisible. No matter how chaotic life became, people always seemed to find their way home for warm food, soft lights, and familiar voices. I grew up watching neighbors greet each other across driveways carrying pumpkin pies and foil-covered trays. Even the most complicated families somehow managed to pull themselves together for a few hours and pretend that love lived inside their walls. I believed that too, at least until my 18th birthday. The year Thanksgiving fell on the same day. The year I discovered I was not part of my own family in the way I had always hoped. I still remember the sound of the wind that evening, how it scraped against the siding of our house in Ohio like a quiet warning. My fingers were numb around the house key, and my breath made small clouds in the air as I stood on the front porch. A thin layer of snow dusted the welcome mat. I stared at it for a moment because it was the only thing that seemed to acknowledge I was there. Inside the house, golden light flickered through the windows. I heard laughter, the loud, open-hearted kind that only happens when people feel safe and loved. For one strange second, a foolish, hopeful second, I thought they were laughing because they were waiting for me. 18 felt like a milestone. I had spent my whole life doing everything right, getting good grades, taking extra shifts at the grocery store, cleaning up after my brother Gavin whenever he messed things up. This would be the first birthday where I was old enough to be celebrated as an adult. I pictured a cake, maybe a small gift, even a simple greeting from my parents. I turned the key gently, trying not to slip on the frozen porch boards. The door opened just enough for the warmth inside to hit my face. Someone cheered in the dining room. More voices joined in. I stepped inside boots, wet from melted snow, and paused in the entryway. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon filled the air like something out of a holiday commercial. There were decorations everywhere, strings of orange and brown leaves glittering under the light. I walked forward slowly, almost afraid to ruin the scene by announcing I had arrived. Then I saw it. My mother carried a perfectly roasted turkey toward the table, smiling proudly while my father filmed her with his phone. Gavin sat at the center of the table like a king. Everyone was facing him, waiting for him. No one even turned when I closed the door behind me. Not one person looked up. My birthday was the same day. Not the same week, not the same month, the same day. They knew that. Everyone knew that. I swallowed the mix of hope and confusion rising in my chest and took a few steps closer. I waited for anyone to say something. Maybe they were planning a surprise. Maybe they wanted me to walk in at the right moment. Then I saw the banner hanging above the table. Bold letters shimmered under the chandelier. "Happy Thanksgiving, Gavin." My heart dropped hard enough that I felt it in my knees. It was not a birthday banner. It was not for me at all. Gavin grinned while my mother placed the turkey in front of him and kissed the top of his head. I had seen her do that hundreds of times, but tonight it felt painfully sharp, as if the gesture itself reminded me that her affection rarely ever landed on me. Someone clapped and said, "You deserve this, champion." Someone else added, "We are so proud of you." My mother laughed the delighted kind that she never used with me and said he worked so hard he earned this night. I stood there waiting for her to glance my way. She did not. Not even when I shifted my weight and my coat rustled loudly. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, hoping for a message from them. Maybe they had sent something earlier. The screen was blank. No greeting, no reminder that I mattered. Nothing. I thought about saying something right then, something bright and cheerful to lighten the atmosphere. Maybe they would remember. Maybe someone would gasp and apologize and run to me with a hug. But the truth inside me whispered a colder prediction. They had not forgotten. They had chosen not to remember. I looked at the clock on the microwave. 6:23 in the evening. By this time every year, they always gathered around to cut the Thanksgiving pie. It was tradition. It was family. It was ours. Yet this year, the chair where I always sat was gone, replaced with a stool that held extra napkins. My place at the table had literally been removed. I felt my throat tighten as if invisible hands were gripping my windpipe. I tried to steady my voice and whispered the words I had carried with me the entire day. "It is my birthday." The words left my mouth like fragile glass and disappeared before they reached the table. No one reacted. Not a flicker. Not a tilt of a head. Not the smallest pause in conversation. I could have been a ghost in my own house, and they would have treated me exactly the same. Outside, the wind howled again, pressing cold air through the cracks in the door. I stood there watching the people who were supposed to love me choose not to see me. Something inside me shifted so quietly I almost did not feel it. It was not anger. It was not sadness. It was understanding. They had erased me long before tonight. This was simply the first time I had stepped far enough outside their shadow to see it clearly. I realized then that they had not just forgotten my birthday. They had chosen to celebrate Thanksgiving without me, chosen to lift Gavin up, chosen to pretend I did not exist, and for the first time in my life, a small, still voice inside whispered that maybe I did not belong with them at all. I grew up in a small town in Ohio where families seemed to come in predictable shapes. There were the cheerful ones who always waved from their porches, the quiet ones who kept to themselves, and then there was my family, a perfectly polished picture from the outside and a hollow echo on the inside. Whenever neighbors drove by, they saw a neat lawn, a white front porch, and holiday decorations placed with meticulous care. They saw my mother Donna waving with a smile that looked sweet and warm. They saw my father Paul in his collared shirts, always mowing the lawn in straight lines that impressed the older men on our street. They saw my brother Gavin in his football jersey, a star player with the kind of charm that made people forgive him before he ever apologized. And they saw me usually through the kitchen window where I was washing dishes or carrying groceries or folding laundry while the rest of my family stood outside laughing together. We lived in a town that worshipped image. Church was not just a place to pray, but a place to be seen. My mother understood that better than anyone. She put her energy into perfecting everything for the community, whether it was the casserole she brought to the church potluck or the spotless outfits she picked for us every Sunday morning. People always complimented her on Gavin, and she accepted those compliments like gold coins. When they complimented me, it felt like spare change, something she accepted only out of politeness. I remember being 8 years old the first time I noticed the shift. We had just finished a Christmas service, and an elderly woman from church bent down, squeezed my hand, and said, "You have such a lovely daughter, Donna." My mother smiled, but her eyes drifted immediately to Gavin, who was busy charming a cluster of adults. She responded, "She has her moments, but that one she pointed to Gavin is our pride." The woman looked at me again, as if searching for something she had missed. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, not understanding why it hurt so much to be brushed aside in front of someone who barely knew me. That moment set the tone for many years. I was the quiet, responsible daughter, the one who helped clean up after gatherings, the one who stayed home when Gavin needed a ride, the one who took the blame when something went wrong because it was easier for everyone if I just accepted it. My mother liked that version of me, the obedient and invisible version. My father liked it even more. He was a man who worked long hours and expected a peaceful home when he returned. Peaceful did not mean happy. Peaceful meant silent. Peaceful meant no questions and no disagreements. Peaceful meant doing what he said even when it was unfair, especially when it was unfair. He bonded with Gavin over sports and weekend projects. They built birdhouses, fixed the fence, and tossed footballs in the yard. Whenever I asked if I could join them, my father would give me a small, stiff laugh and tell me to help my mother because girls needed to know useful things. Useful things meant chores. Useful things meant learning to keep the house running while the men did the important work. Useful things meant pretending to be content with whatever scraps of attention were thrown my way. My mother had a favorite line she used at least twice a week. "Make sure you smile, Maddie. People do not like girls who look difficult." The irony was that my mother rarely smiled at me unless someone else was watching. She smiled at Gavin constantly, the tender, proud smile that mothers in movies save for their favorite child. When Gavin won a football game, she baked him brownies and took photos of him at every angle. When I won a writing contest, she said "good for you" without looking up from her phone. She told people Gavin was gifted. She told people I was fine. Growing up in that house meant learning to disappear without being asked. I learned to be small in arguments to tuck my emotions away before they became inconvenient. I learned to clean the kitchen before anyone else woke up because someone had to do it. I learned to keep my voice soft because I did not want to provoke the cold tone my father used when I asked too many questions. There were times during childhood when I convinced myself that maybe things would get better as I got older. Adults on television always said that parents mellow with age, that siblings grow closer. But in our household, it felt like the opposite. The older I got, the more my mother seemed irritated by me, as if my growing independence took something from her. Instead of mellowing, my father became more demanding with each passing year, pressing his expectations on me as if I were a piece of wood he could shape by force. And Gavin only grew shinier, more successful, more adored. He became the center of every conversation, and I became the person who took pictures of the conversations. If someone from church asked about me, my mother would tilt her head and say, "Maddie is doing fine, you know how girls are." But if they asked about Gavin, she would launch into a full speech about his leadership, about his dedication, about the bright future he had ahead. I wondered sometimes if they even realized that I heard every word. They did not whisper. They did not soften it. They said everything openly because to them it was normal. It was the order of the world. Gavin first, Gavin bright, Gavin loved, me present but easily forgotten. At school, teachers assumed I was the quiet type by nature. Friends assumed my family was perfect because that was how we presented ourselves. I never corrected them. I never told anyone that sometimes my mother squeezed my wrist so hard it left faint marks. I never told anyone that my father only spoke to me when he wanted something done. I never told anyone that my brother rarely looked me in the eyes unless he wanted me to cover for him. My world became a balancing act between what was expected of me and what I wished someone would notice. I did not need to be adored. I did not need to be praised. I just needed to be seen. Even now, when I look back at those quiet years before everything shattered, I can see the invisible lines that defined my place in the family. I was the responsible daughter. I was the helper. I was the background. And for a long time, I believed that was all I would ever be. There were so many small moments growing up that I brushed aside because I thought ignoring them would make them hurt less. Looking back, I can see how each of those moments carved something into me little by little until the shape of the person I became was molded more by absence than affection. I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, if I was patient enough, if I stayed quiet enough, things would change. But those years taught me a different truth. Some people only notice the child who shines loud enough to reflect their own pride, and they let the quieter child fade into the background like scenery in a play. My earliest memories of being pushed aside often came disguised as compliments for Gavin. Adults loved telling my mother how lucky she was to have a son like him. They said he had leadership potential, that he had natural talent, that he was destined for something big. My mother absorbed every word of praise and echoed it back as if she were reciting a prayer. When those same adults said anything nice about me, she nodded politely and moved on before I could even smile. She treated my achievements like temporary weather, a moment of sunshine on a mostly cloudy day. But when Gavin achieved something, she treated it like a national holiday. I learned early that being good was not enough. I had to be exceptional just to be acknowledged, and even then, it rarely lasted longer than a few seconds. When I got straight A's in 5th grade, my mother hung the report card on the refrigerator for one day and removed it the next morning to make space for a flyer advertising Gavin's football tryouts. She smiled at the flyer longer than she had ever smiled at my academic awards. That same year, I asked if I could try soccer. I had watched girls my age running across the field, laughing with their teammates, and I wanted to feel that freedom too. My mother told me it was not a good idea because she needed me after school to help with chores. A week later, she signed Gavin up for private football lessons. She said boys needed activities to stay motivated. I asked what girls needed. She said girls needed to learn responsibility. Chores became a permanent part of my identity. I washed dishes, cooked simple meals, vacuumed the living room, and organized drawers overflowing with clutter. My mother never called it work. She called it helping the family. Gavin never had to help unless it was something fun like decorating the Christmas tree or washing the car with my father while they splashed each other with the hose. If Gavin forgot to take out the trash, my mother laughed and said boys forget things. If I forgot, she frowned and said I was becoming unreliable. The difference in expectations settled into my bones until I accepted it as fact. I was the reliable one, the steady one, the quiet one who made everything easier. Whenever Gavin messed up, I was the person my mother turned to. She would pull me aside and whisper, "Maddie, you know how your brother is. Please do not make things worse by asking questions." Then she would send me into the room where Gavin waited with that familiar, half-guilty, half-expectant look. I covered for him more times than I can count. When he dented the car door backing out of the driveway, I told our parents I had accidentally dropped my bike against it. When he lied about failing a test, I pretended I had misplaced the mail and kept the envelope hidden until he could retake it. When he snuck out to a party and got caught by a neighbor, I told my mother he had gone for a late-night run and must have forgotten to tell her. Each lie chipped away at me. I told myself I did it out of love, but the truth was simpler. I did it because keeping the peace was worth more to my parents than the actual truth. The day my mother grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave a faint bruise, I realized how fragile that peace really was. Gavin had broken an expensive serving dish while practicing some ridiculous trick shot with a football in the kitchen. My mother rushed into the room, saw the shattered porcelain, and immediately looked at me. I opened my mouth to explain, but she squeezed my wrist so tightly my voice caught in my throat. "Not now," she whispered with clipped precision. "Smile. Act normal. Do not make a scene." My wrist throbbed, but I forced myself to smile as she instructed. Later, she told the church ladies that Gavin had accidentally knocked over a vase, but everything was fine because I helped clean it up. They all cooed about what a helpful daughter I was. No one noticed the way I kept flexing my hand to hide the red mark around my wrist. These years taught me the art of shrinking. Whenever Gavin entered a room, my parents lit up. Whenever I entered, I made myself small to avoid taking any of the attention that seemed reserved for him. Gavin knew he was the favorite, but he did not gloat openly. Instead, he relied on me to smooth things over. He apologized with glances instead of words, as if his silent regret was enough to erase the imbalance between us. In school, teachers praised me for being mature and responsible. Friends told me I was patient and understanding. They did not know that I had learned those traits out of necessity, not choice. It was easier to stay quiet than to explain why my mother flinched when I spoke too loudly, or why my father sighed with irritation whenever I asked if I could spend time with friends instead of staying home to babysit Gavin. There were nights when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if something was wrong with me. If maybe I had been born lacking some essential spark that made children lovable. Gavin glowed effortlessly, while I felt like a dim light bulb flickering in the corner of a room no one entered unless they needed something. As the years passed, the pattern never changed. Gavin won trophies. I washed them. Gavin earned applause. I stood in the background smiling for photos. Gavin made mistakes. I covered them. The world applauded him while expecting me to keep everything running smoothly. I used to tell myself it was normal that every family had their roles. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered that I deserved more. Not praise, not gifts. Just a moment where someone looked at me the way they looked at him. A moment where I did not have to earn my place at the table. A moment where I felt seen without having to fight for the smallest scrap of attention. Those moments never came, and with every year, the hope that they ever would grew smaller until it nearly disappeared. The morning of my 18th birthday began like any other morning except for the quiet flicker of hope I tried so hard to ignore. I told myself not to expect anything because expecting anything from my family only guaranteed disappointment. Still, I could not completely shut out the small whisper inside me that insisted maybe this year would be different. Maybe turning 18 would matter. Maybe reaching adulthood would be the moment they finally looked at me and saw someone worth celebrating. I woke up early because I wanted to check my phone before work. The bedroom was cold and dim, and the floor creaked softly as I walked across it to where my phone charged on my nightstand. I picked it up with fingers that trembled just a bit more than I wanted to admit. The first thing I saw was the time glowing on the screen, 6:13 in the morning. The second thing I saw was nothing else. No notifications, no messages, no missed calls. My lock screen had never felt so empty. I stared at it longer than I should have, thinking perhaps the screen had frozen or that the internet connection had dropped. I refreshed it twice, then a third time, just in case the universe needed urging. Still nothing. I opened my messages, hoping maybe someone had sent something in the middle of the night. The group chat with my family sat untouched. No new bubbles, no emojis, not even a half-hearted greeting that could have been written while half asleep. The silence felt intentional, heavy, cold. I switched to Facebook just to be sure. I scrolled through my feed filled with posts from classmates sharing throwback pictures and birthday dinners their families had planned for them. I clicked on the birthday reminders hoping to see my name pop up. It did not. My mother had changed the privacy settings for family birthdays months ago. She claimed it was for safety, but I knew better. She did not want people to notice that she never posted about me. I refreshed the notifications again, even though I knew nothing would appear. I used to believe that a birthday greeting was the easiest way for someone to show they cared. 3 words. Happy birthday. Simple. Quick. Effortless. Yet even that seemed too heavy for my family to lift. I set the phone down slowly, trying not to let the weight in my chest ruin the morning. I had a shift at the grocery store and I needed to stay focused. Work was one of the few places where I felt steady because customers smiled at me and coworkers asked how my day was going. They did not know my birthday was today, but I still found comfort in the small kindness of strangers. Before leaving my room, I checked my phone one more time. Still nothing. I tried to tell myself that they would remember later in the day. Maybe they were busy. Maybe they planned a surprise. Maybe they wanted to pretend they forgot so the moment of remembering would feel more meaningful. But deep down, the truth was already settling in. They did not forget. They simply did not think it mattered enough to acknowledge. At the store, I kept sneaking glances at my phone between tasks, bagging groceries, no messages, pushing carts in from the lot, no notifications, restocking cereal boxes. Nothing. Around noon, one of my coworkers, a retired woman named Marcia, stopped me near the freezer aisle. She wore bright lipstick and always smelled faintly of lavender. She smiled warmly and said, "You look a little pale, sweetheart. Everything all right?" I hesitated, then nodded even though my voice caught when I said, "I am fine, just a long morning." She reached out to pat my arm gently. "Today is going to be a good day. I can feel it," she said. I forced a smile. "Thank you." She walked away, humming a tune, and I wondered how a woman who barely knew me could offer more comfort in 10 seconds than my own family had offered in years. During my lunch break, I sat alone in the small employee room and opened my phone again. My lock screen was still blank. My battery percentage was lower. My hope was even lower than that. I tapped my text messages just to see if maybe something had slipped through. Nothing. The only notification I had received all morning was an automated reminder from the bank about maintaining a minimum balance. I put my phone face down on the table and pressed my palms into my eyes, hoping to blink away the ache building behind them. When my shift ended, I checked one last time. My heart made a small, painful twist when I saw a single notification waiting for me. For a moment, I felt something lift inside me until I saw what it actually was. A promotional message from a clothing store offering a birthday discount. I almost laughed at the irony. A store acknowledged my birthday before my own family. As I walked to the bus stop, the wind stung my cheeks and my hands felt stiff from the cold. I looked at my phone again, desperate for something, anything, that would tell me I meant something to the people who had raised me. I stared at the blank screen and whispered quietly, "Happy birthday" to myself because no one else had. It was the loneliest greeting I had ever received, yet somehow it still felt more sincere than the silence waiting for me at home. When the bus arrived, I climbed aboard and sat by the window watching the small town pass by. I kept my phone on my lap pretending that it might light up at any moment. It never did. And in that silence, I felt the truth settle deeper than ever. My 18th birthday was invisible to them before the day even began. By the time my shift ended, the sky had already begun to dim into the soft purple shade that always made our small town look colder than it really was. I walked from the bus stop toward home, feeling the ache in my feet from standing all day, but also feeling something heavier in my chest. I kept telling myself that perhaps the silence that morning had been a mistake, or that they were saving their energy for something bigger later in the evening. It was my 18th birthday after all. Maybe they wanted to surprise me. Maybe they wanted the night to feel special. I held on to that thought like someone clinging to a frayed rope and tried to ignore the sinking sense that the rope had already snapped hours earlier. When I reached the driveway, I saw more cars than usual parked along the curb. Neighbors' cars, church friends' cars, relatives' cars. The kind of crowd that only gathered for meaningful celebrations. My heartbeat quickened not with joy but with confusion. I hurried inside, expecting someone to jump out from behind the doorway or at least flash me a smile. Instead, the sound that hit me first was laughter. Loud, layered laughter filled the living room like a bubbling pot that had boiled over. I stepped past the entryway and froze. Every inch of the house seemed decorated. Autumn-colored streamers draped across the walls. A long dining table was covered with dishes and desserts. Plates were stacked in tall, neat piles. The chandelier sparkled brighter than usual, as if it too had been polished for the occasion. I looked around eagerly, waiting for someone to greet me. No one did. They were all facing the dining table where something gleamed beneath the warm lights. I stepped closer, and then I saw it clearly. The banner that should have had my name on it. The banner that should have read, "Happy 18th Birthday, Maddie." Instead, the letters announced "Happy Thanksgiving, Gavin" in swirling gold font that looked expensive. I stopped walking. Something inside me stopped breathing. I could not understand it at first, even though the truth stared me directly in the face. People crowded around Gavin as he sat at the center of the table, smiling confidently, like he had been cast in the starring role of a play he did not even audition for. He looked handsome and composed and pleased with himself in the way only people who are constantly celebrated can be. My mother stood beside him, beaming with pride. She adjusted his collar and brushed imaginary lint off his sleeve as she spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "He deserves this. He has worked so hard. His success means everything to this family." Those words landed inside me like stones dropped into deep water. I waited for her to glance around the room. I waited for her to notice that I had walked in still wearing my store apron with my hair windblown from the cold. I waited for her to remember. She did not. Neither did my father. He was standing near the kitchen filming everything on his phone with an expression that made him look 20 years younger. People clapped Gavin on the back, congratulating him on something I could not even identify. It was not his birthday. It was not a football championship. It was not a graduation. It was simply Thanksgiving, a holiday that had somehow become a celebration of him. I stood at the edge of the living room feeling as though I had slipped underwater. Conversations blurred together into a single noisy hum as I tried to understand what I was seeing. Then my mother noticed me. For a split second, her eyes flicked in my direction, and I felt a tiny bloom of hope. But instead of smiling, she gestured at me quickly and said in a low, irritated voice, "Close the door. Maddie, you are letting the cold in." That was it. That was my greeting. I closed the door quietly, swallowing the ache rising in my throat. No one looked at me again. They continued eating, laughing, taking photos with Gavin. Someone raised a glass of sparkling cider and shouted to the best young man in the house. My father nodded proudly as if the toast were perfectly reasonable. I scanned the room for any sign that this was some sort of elaborate joke gone wrong. But there was no cake for me, no wrapped gift, no candles. My family had not simply forgotten my birthday. They had rewritten the entire evening into a celebration without me. I took a slow step forward and spotted a small corner table near the back of the room. On it, the remnants of a half-eaten dessert sat on a paper plate. A bent fork rested beside it. The crumbs were scattered unevenly, as though someone had taken a bite and then wandered off. That plate was the only sign that anyone might have thought of me. A leftover nothing tucked away behind the real festivities. I felt humiliation wrap around me like a cold hand. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words stuck. I wanted to say, "Hey, it is my birthday." I wanted to say, "Does anyone care?" But when I finally managed to whisper something, it came out thin and trembling. "I am home." No one responded. No one even turned. Standing there watching them, I felt like a stranger in a place where I was supposed to belong. I could feel tears building behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of these people who barely remembered my existence unless it benefited them. I stepped back into the shadow of the hallway, watching the celebration unfold without me. A bitter truth settled into my bones. This was not an accident. This was not forgetfulness. This was a choice. They had chosen this night for Gavin. They had chosen to invite everyone but me. They had chosen to shine every light in the house on him while leaving me in the dark. And in that moment, I understood something that I had been afraid to admit for years. I was not part of the story my family liked to tell. I was the footnote no one read. I stood in the hallway longer than I should have, staring at the back of Gavin's head while the entire room orbited around him like planets around a star. The noise grew louder as more people arrived, each one greeted with warm smiles and cheerful voices. I could hear them praising the decorations, admiring the food, congratulating my mother on hosting another perfect gathering. Everything felt bright and alive, except for the space where I stood. That space felt cold and hollow, as if I had been carved out of the night and placed behind a glass wall that no one bothered to look through. I kept waiting for someone to notice me. Even a small glance would have been something. But minutes passed, and no one did. My mother walked by carrying a tray of rolls and brushed past me without acknowledging I was there. The scent of warm bread trailed behind her, but the warmth never reached me. I took a slow breath and stepped forward. My legs felt heavy, as though each step required permission I was no longer sure I had. I moved closer to the dining table where my father stood recording Gavin laughing with a group of neighbors. He angled the camera with such pride that it made my chest tighten. I had never seen him record me like that. Not once. Not in 18 years of school projects, dance recitals, or certificates taped to the fridge for less than a day. I stopped beside him, hoping he would notice me out of the corner of his eye. He did not. Instead, he shifted slightly to get a better view of Gavin and held the phone higher. Someone said, "Paul, he looks just like you," and my father laughed so loudly it drowned out whatever I had been about to say. My stomach twisted. I swallowed hard and walked around to the other side of the room where my mother stood fawning over Gavin. She fixed a strand of his hair and straightened his collar and told him he looked handsome. I watched quietly, each gesture landing like a tiny sting on my skin. She glanced up at the group gathered around him and announced proudly, "He has come so far this year." We could not be more thankful for him. She said "we" as if I were part of that statement, even though she had not looked at me all evening. I did not know when exactly the ache inside me turned into something sharper, but I felt it growing with every second. It was not rage exactly, but something more fragile. Something like grief. Grief for the version of this day I had imagined. Grief for the version of me who still believed they might remember. I took a step closer. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm, too filled with people who seemed impossibly far away. I opened my mouth, but my voice refused to come out. It took a moment before I found it again, thin and shaky. "Mom." She turned her head slightly as if she had heard something faint in the distance, but before she looked fully at me, someone beside her said, "Gavin, tell us about your scholarship," and her attention snapped back to him like a magnet. The ache inside me twisted again, but this time I refused to let it swallow me whole. I forced myself forward until I was standing right between two clusters of people directly in their line of sight. I cleared my throat louder this time. "Mom." The room did not quiet, but a few nearby heads turned. My mother finally looked at me. Truly looked at me for the first time that night. The confusion on her face lasted less than a second before irritation replaced it. "What is it, Maddie?" she said impatiently. I took a steadying breath, not wanting my voice to break. "Today is my birthday." The words hung in the air like a fragile ornament suspended by a thread. For a moment, I thought everything might stop. That they might gasp or apologize or rush over to hug me. That someone might finally realize what tonight was supposed to mean. Instead, silence spread unevenly through the space like a cold ripple. People exchanged quick glances, unsure how to react. My mother froze, then let out a soft, incredulous laugh. "Oh, Maddie, not tonight. Do not make this about you." Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp. I felt the first crack inside me. My father lowered his phone slowly, but not in shock, more in annoyance. He looked at me with the kind of expression he used when I forgot to fold laundry properly, a small shake of his head, the kind that told me I was already in the wrong for speaking. Gavin looked uncomfortable for half a second, but then someone clapped him on the back and he straightened again, pretending everything was fine. No one moved toward me. No one wished me happy birthday. No one even acknowledged what I had said. My mother stepped closer and gripped my wrist with her familiar heavy fingertips. I felt her nails bite into my skin through my sleeve. She leaned in without smiling, whispering sharply so only I could hear, "Do not ruin this night. Your brother deserves the spotlight." Everything in me wanted to pull my hand away, but I stood still, partly out of habit, partly out of shock. Her grip tightened once more before she let go quickly, as if touching me too long might draw attention she did not want. She straightened her expression, then turned back to the group with a warm smile that erased any hint of the tension between us. "Sorry about that," she said lightly. "You know how sensitive teenagers can be." A few people chuckled politely. I felt a wave of humiliation wash over me so hot that I almost stepped backward. My face burned, my throat stung. I could not even breathe right. I looked around for anyone who might understand what this moment meant. But everyone seemed eager to pretend nothing had happened, as if my words were nothing more than an inconvenient gust of wind. I tried to speak again, but nothing came out. My mother had already turned away. My father was turning the camera back on. Gavin was lifting a glass to toast something I could not hear. The noise of the room swallowed me whole. I stepped back, slowly blending into the shadows near the hallway again. My wrist pulsed where her fingers had squeezed. My birthday had never belonged to me less than it did in that moment. And as I watched them celebrate without even glancing my way, I felt something shift deep inside me. Something quiet, but fierce. Something that whispered that this moment would not be forgotten. Not by me. I lingered in the hallway longer than I intended, hoping the sting in my wrist and the embarrassment flooding my chest would settle before anyone noticed I was still there. But no one was paying attention to me. People continued chatting, laughing, eating as if the small disaster of my confession had evaporated instantly. I wished I could evaporate with it. I finally forced myself to move farther into the dining room because the humiliation of standing still felt worse than the humiliation of being ignored. I drifted to the side of the table where a few unopened dishes sat waiting to be served. I looked for any sign that someone had left something for me. A card, a cupcake, a note scribbled in haste. Anything. The table was full, but not with anything meant for me. Plates of food desserts, bowls of mashed potatoes and cranberry sauce, but nothing resembling a birthday gift. My father noticed me hovering, and for a moment he seemed irritated that I was too close to the guests. He stepped between me and the table, holding a wrapped box in shiny paper with a crisp white ribbon. For one brief, hopeful second, I thought, maybe this was for me. Maybe, despite everything, there was at least one thing waiting for me at the end of this terrible night. I started to smile even though the weight of disappointment still clung to my ribs. But he did not hand it to me. He walked right past me and placed the box in front of Gavin with a proud clap on his shoulder. "A gift for our boy," he said loudly. "Could not wait until Christmas." The crowd cheered, and Gavin looked up at him with that easy smile he always had when the world tilted perfectly in his direction. I stood there unable to move as Gavin pulled the ribbon free with a flourish. The paper peeled away quickly, and inside the box was a brand new phone. The newest model, the kind I had only seen in the hands of wealthier kids or displayed behind glass at electronics stores. Everyone around him gasped and praised him and teased him like he was some celebrity who had just received his first award. My father laughed proudly and said he deserves the best. Then someone nudged him and asked about me. The question was casual, harmless, and not even directed at me. "Paul, did Maddie get anything tonight?" My father chuckled. "Oh, she is fine. She knows we celebrate her in other ways." The answer hit me like a slap. In other ways. I wondered what those ways were because I had never seen them. My mother appeared from behind me carrying a small plate with something on it. She glanced at me briefly, then placed it on the corner of the counter as if she could not be bothered to find a more meaningful spot. "Here," she said without meeting my eyes. We did not forget completely. The words were clipped like she had cut off the softer parts before handing them to me. I looked at the plate. It held a tiny square of cake. Not a full slice, not even a fresh one. The frosting had already hardened slightly, as if it had been sitting out for hours. The edges were smudged and the crumbs were uneven, as though someone had cut it with a dull knife or scooped it out hastily while cleaning up. There were no candles, no decorations, no name. Nothing that suggested this piece of cake was meant for a milestone birthday. My 18th year distilled into a leftover scrape of dessert. I stared at it, unable to touch it. My mother must have noticed my hesitation because she sighed impatiently and said, "Well, do you want it or not?" I picked up the plate despite the humiliation burning across my skin. I held it awkwardly with both hands like it might break or crumble or vanish. My father called out from across the table, "Take a picture of Gavin with his new phone, Donna." My mother brushed past me again, rushing toward him with her camera ready. I watched them gather around Gavin as though he were the only one who mattered, the only one who deserved celebration, the only one worth the effort. A moment later, my mother returned carrying something else. A card, folded crookedly. She handed it to me quickly and whispered, "Do not make a scene." I opened it slowly, hoping for something kind, something personal, something that made this night feel less like erasure. Inside the card were 4 words printed in faint blue ink. Be grateful for what you get. Not even a happy birthday. Not even my name. I stared at the message until the letters blurred and the heat behind my eyes threatened to spill over. The handwriting was not even hers. It was a generic card someone had picked up from the clearance rack and tossed aside until they remembered I existed. I closed the card quietly and placed it on the same counter where the hardened cake sat. For a brief second, I wondered what would happen if I smashed the plate or ripped the card in half. Would they notice then? Would they stop laughing long enough to see what they had done? But I did not. Instead, I let out a small, humorless laugh because the absurdity of the moment was almost comical. My mother heard the laugh and shot me a warning look as if my amusement threatened to ruin the illusion she had built for the guests. I held the plate and card like they were heavy stones and stepped away from the crowd. People were taking more photos of Gavin. My father lifted a glass to toast him. Someone shouted how lucky he was to have such supportive parents. I nearly choked on the irony. As I backed into the hallway again, the light from the dining room spilled over me but could not touch me. I was in the same house standing just feet away from my own family, yet I had never felt more invisible. I spent the rest of the evening pretending I was not unraveling. I stood in the hallway holding the crooked card and the drying piece of cake as if my hands were performing a role I had memorized. I told myself to breathe slowly, to blink normally, to stay still until the night ended. People continued celebrating in the next room where Gavin soaked up every moment like sunlight. Laughter rose and fell in waves, and each one chipped away at whatever was left of my composure. Every time someone shouted his name or complimented him or told my parents how proud they must be, I felt myself shrinking farther into the shadows. By the time the guests began drifting toward the door, saying their goodnights, I could not feel anything at all. Not sadness, not anger, just a numbness that settled in my bones like winter frost. I placed the plate of cake on the counter and slipped upstairs without a word. My parents did not notice. Gavin did not notice. No one asked where I was going. My bedroom felt colder than usual when I stepped inside. The overhead light hummed faintly, casting long, thin shadows across the walls. I closed the door gently and leaned against it. The quiet hit me harder than any slap could have. It was the kind of silence that made the truth unavoidable. I was never going to matter to them. I walked to the mirror above my dresser and stared at my reflection. My cheeks were flushed from humiliation and my eyes looked tired, older than 18. I wondered if anyone downstairs would notice if I disappeared from the house completely. The answer came quickly and painfully. No, they would not. I grabbed my backpack from the closet and tossed it onto the bed. My hands shook as I unzipped it, but I forced myself to keep moving. I filled it with the essentials without thinking. 2 shirts, jeans, socks, pajamas, a sweater, toothbrush, my name tag from work, and the small amount of cash I had saved hidden in an envelope under my socks. I tucked my charger into a side pocket and grabbed the only sentimental item I owned, a small keychain Mrs. Stein, my former English teacher, had given me when I won a writing competition in 10th grade. It read, "You are allowed to take up space." I held it for a moment, then dropped it into the bag because I needed that reminder more than ever. I checked the time. 11:42. I opened my bedroom door slowly, listening for footsteps or voices. The house felt different now, quieter still, pulsing faintly with the last echoes of laughter. I walked down the stairs cautiously, avoiding the steps that creaked the loudest. When I reached the bottom, my father stepped out of the kitchen carrying a mug. He almost bumped into me, and his expression tightened immediately. "What are you doing up here?" he said in a tone dripping with disapproval. I swallowed hard and kept my voice steady. "I was just grabbing something from my room." He moved closer until I could feel the heat of his anger radiating off him. He set the mug on the counter with a loud thud and leaned toward me. "If this is about earlier," he said, "keep it to yourself. You embarrassed your mother tonight. You embarrassed all of us." The words struck me square in the chest. I felt them like blows. I opened my mouth to speak, but he raised a hand to silence me. "I do not want to hear excuses, Maddie. You will not ruin things for your brother. Not now. Not ever." When I did not respond, he pressed closer until the counter dug into my back. His palm slammed against the wall just inches from my head. The sound cracked through the kitchen like gunfire. I flinched reflexively, my breath catching in my throat. He stared at me with an intensity I had only seen once before, and even then it had terrified me for days. "We do not need your attitude," he said coldly. "Do you understand me?" I nodded because I did not trust my voice. He stepped back and grabbed his mug, brushing past me as if the moment had not happened at all. He walked down the hallway and disappeared into the living room where the faint light of the fireplace still flickered. The moment the kitchen fell silent again, I exhaled shakily. My legs trembled, my hands trembled, even my thoughts trembled. That was the moment I knew. The moment the line between disappointment and danger finally became visible. I slung the backpack over my shoulder and walked to the back door instead of the front. I slipped on my coat, grabbed my boots, and opened the door as quietly as possible. The cold air hit me immediately sharp and unforgiving, but somehow cleaner than the air inside the house. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, settling on the porch steps like tiny white feathers. I stepped into the snow and left the door slightly open, hoping it would look like a draft rather than a desperate escape. I walked quickly down the driveway with my hood pulled low over my face. The street was empty except for the dim glow of street lamps reflecting off the snow. I did not look back. I could not. The bus stop sat 4 blocks away near a flickering light that made the sidewalk look like it was blinking. My boots crunched softly with each step. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to hold in the last pieces of courage I had left. When I reached the bench, I checked the schedule through the fog of my breath. The last bus into the city arrived at midnight. It was 11:58. I stood under the street lamp, feeling the cold seep through my coat, while my breath hung in the air like a ghost. As the bus rounded the corner, its headlights scattering across the snow, I whispered one thing quietly to myself: "Happy birthday, Maddie." Then I climbed aboard without looking back. The bus rattled through the dark Ohio backroads for almost an hour before the faint lights of Columbus finally appeared on the horizon. I pressed my forehead against the cold window and watched as the fields disappeared and the city rose in their place, tall, bright, restless. I had imagined so many times what it would feel like to leave home, but those daydreams had never included the hollow ache sitting heavy in my chest. I thought I would feel free or brave, or at least certain. Instead, I felt like someone stepping into cold water 1 inch at a time, unsure whether I was swimming towards something or drowning slowly. When the bus pulled into the downtown station, I waited until everyone else had climbed off. My backpack felt heavier than before, as if the fabric itself had absorbed everything I was trying not to think about. I stepped onto the platform and shivered. The cold here felt different, cutting sharper, sliding beneath my coat like a thin blade. The city was alive in a way our small town never was. Cars hissed along wet roads, their headlights bouncing off tall buildings. People moved quickly with purpose, clutching bags or steaming cups of coffee. No one made eye contact. No one greeted me. In a strange way, the anonymity felt safer than the familiarity of home. At least here, I was allowed to be invisible without being blamed for it. I found a map near the exit and looked for cheap motels. The closest one was almost a mile away. I tightened my backpack straps and began walking. The sidewalks glistened under streetlights, making the city look almost pretty if I ignored the cold biting at my skin. Every storefront I passed seemed to advertise warmth coffee restaurants' glowing windows, but each required money I did not have. My breath came out in uneven clouds as I hurried along. When I reached the motel, it looked nothing like the pictures posted online. The sign flickered uncertainly, and the building itself leaned slightly as though it were exhausted from years of neglect. Still, it was shelter, and I needed that more than anything. The woman at the front desk barely looked up when I arrived. She clicked her gum loudly and asked for payment. I handed over most of my small stash of cash while forcing my face to stay expressionless. When she slid the key across the counter, she said only third floor left side and went back to scrolling on her phone. The hallway upstairs smelled like cigarettes and stale air. My room was no better. The wallpaper peeled at the corners, the carpet stained with patterns I did not want to examine. The heater rattled every few seconds like it was coughing. I placed my backpack on the bed, which sank under its weight, and then sat beside it, staring at the cheap curtain fluttering from the draft. For a moment, everything felt still. Then, the stillness cracked. My throat tightened, my chest pulled inward. I buried my face into my hands and let out the kind of breath that sounded almost like a sob, even though I refused to let actual tears fall. I wanted to believe I had made the right decision leaving home, but courage felt too far away to hold. After a while, I lay back on the bed and pulled my coat around me because the blanket smelled sour. I closed my eyes, hoping sleep would come quickly. It did not. My mind replayed the night over and over. Gavin smiling under the chandelier, my mother saying, "Do not make this about you," my father slamming the wall near my head, the leftover cake, the crooked card, the silence. I must have drifted off eventually because I woke to the sound of footsteps and muffled voices outside my room. My phone said 4:20 in the morning. I sat up disoriented. Something felt off. My backpack was not where I left it. I slid off the bed and scanned the room. The zipper was open. The contents were scattered. My envelope of emergency cash empty. I stared at the torn fabric with a slow, sinking horror. Someone had entered while I slept. Someone had taken everything they wanted without hesitation. The motel door had a rusty lock that barely clicked. I should have known better, but exhaustion had made me careless. I checked my pockets, hoping I had overlooked something. $6. $6 was all I had left. My chest tightened as if someone had gripped my ribs and squeezed. Panic rose slowly, then quickly until it felt like the room was shrinking around me. I stumbled into the tiny bathroom and turned on the light. My reflection looked ghostly pale eyes, wide unfocused. I gripped the sink, trying to force my breath to slow. "You can figure this out," I whispered, even though I did not believe it. I splashed cold water on my face, but the panic clung stubbornly. I kept thinking of the warmth of home, even if it had never belonged to me. The city felt too big, too loud, too indifferent. I walked back into the room and sat on the floor beside the bed, pulling my knees to my chest. The panic did not go away. It swelled. My breaths came short and sharp. My eyes burned. The truth hit me hard. I was alone, truly alone, and there was no one coming to save me. At some point, the panic dulled into something quieter, like a low ache instead of a sharp blade. The sun had begun rising outside, turning the window a muted gray. I stood slowly, grabbed my coat, and left the room because staying there felt dangerous. I checked out quickly, avoiding the clerk's disinterested stare, and walked back toward the heart of the city. Every sound felt louder than usual, every passing car startling me slightly. I found myself wandering aimlessly until I spotted a rest stop building near the bus terminal. I stepped inside and warmed my hands under the hand dryer because I could not afford anything from the vending machines. A security guard eyed me cautiously but did not say anything. I sat on a bench in the corner trying to calm my jittering nerves. I felt exhausted and hollow and scared in a way I had never felt before. But underneath all that, something else stirred, something stubborn and small and still alive. I had survived the night. I had kept moving even when every part of me wanted to collapse. The city had not welcomed me, but I was still here. And staying alive even in the smallest, quietest way felt like a victory. A painful one, a lonely one, but a victory all the same. By mid-morning, my body felt heavier than my backpack ever had. The exhaustion pressed into my shoulders and settled behind my eyes until even blinking felt like work. I drifted through the city streets without any real direction, following the flow of people who always seemed to know where they were going. I clutched my coat close to my chest, trying to trap whatever warmth I had left. My 6 crumpled dollars sat in my pocket like a reminder of how fragile everything had become. My phone battery hovered near 15%, but I refused to use it. I needed whatever power remained in case of an emergency, and I already felt dangerously close to one. I eventually found myself near a small brick church tucked between a laundromat and a convenience store. Its windows glowed faintly even in the weak winter sun. A sign by the door read, "Community Breakfast All Welcome." I stood there staring at the sign, unsure whether I belonged to the word welcome. Hunger gnawed at me, though, and cold seeped through my shoes until I finally pushed the door open. Warmth hit me first. Then the smell of eggs and coffee drifting through the hallway like a gentle invitation. People moved around inside, carrying trays and setting tables. Most were older volunteers, chatting softly as they worked. No one looked twice at me, which felt strangely comforting. I hovered near the entrance, unsure what to do, until a voice floated toward me. "Sweetheart, you are freezing, come here." I turned and saw a woman in her late 60s with silver hair pulled back in a loose bun. She wore a soft blue sweater and an apron decorated with tiny embroidered flowers. Her eyes were warm in a way that made my throat tighten unexpectedly. She walked over without hesitation and placed a hand lightly on my arm. "You look like you have not eaten yet. Sit." She guided me to a long table near the back. Before I could say anything, she set a warm plate of scrambled eggs, bread, and a small cup of fruit in front of me. "Eat." I nodded because I did not trust my voice. Her kindness landed so gently that it nearly shattered me. I picked up the fork and took a small bite. The food was not fancy, but it tasted better than anything I had eaten in days. She watched me for a moment, then sat down across from me with her hands folded. "I am Mrs. Bloom," she said. "Most people call me Miss B." I swallowed my food slowly and nodded. "I am Maddie." Her expression softened as if the name meant something significant, even though she had never heard it before. "Well, Maddie, it looks like the morning has not been kind to you." I let out a quiet laugh because that was the understatement of the year. She tilted her head slightly, studying my face with a patience that made me feel seen without forcing me to speak. After a moment, she said, "You do not have to explain anything if you do not want to. But if you do, I am here." I stared at my plate while her words settled inside me. No one had said anything like that to me in years. My mother always demanded explanations. My father demanded silence. Gavin demanded forgiveness. But no one had ever simply offered space. I took another bite to steady myself and said quietly, "I left home last night." The words felt heavy but true. She did not gasp or rush to give advice. She just nodded and said, "Okay." I waited for judgment or pity or disbelief. None came. Instead, she said gently, "Well, leaving is never easy, especially when the place you are leaving was supposed to love you." My breath hitched. She knew. Somehow she knew. I looked up at her, and this time I did not try to hide the exhaustion on my face. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine, warm and steady. "You do not look broken," she said. "You look abandoned." The sentence cracked something deep inside me. A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. She did not look away. She did not rush to hush me. She just kept her hand there, grounding me while I breathed through the ache rising in my chest. After a moment, she handed me a small napkin and said softly, "Here, sweetheart." I wiped my eyes, embarrassed and grateful all at once. She motioned for me to keep eating, so I did. When I finished, she stood and said, "Follow me." I hesitated, but something about her voice made it impossible not to trust her. She led me to a small office near the back of the church. The walls were lined with shelves of canned goods, toilet paper, and hygiene kits. She opened a drawer and pulled out a laminated card with a phone number and an address. "This is a women's shelter a few blocks from here," she said. "They can give you a bed food support, even help you look for work. They are good people. Tell them I sent you." I held the card carefully as if it might crumble. "Thank you," I whispered. She placed a warm hand on my shoulder and said, "You are not the first young woman to walk through our doors looking like a ghost, and you will not be the last. What matters is that you keep walking." Her kindness spread through me like heat in a frozen room. She gave me a small bag of toiletries and a pair of thick socks from one of the donation boxes, then walked me toward the front door. Before I stepped outside, she touched my arm again and said, "Maddie, if you need help, come back. You can find me here every morning." I nodded, unable to speak without crying again. As I left the building, the cold air struck me, but it no longer felt unbearable. I looked down at the card in my hand, feeling something I had not felt since before the party: hope. It was small and fragile, but it was real. And as I walked toward the shelter, I whispered a quiet thank you to the empty street because Mrs. Bloom had given me something that no one in my family had offered in years. She looked at me and saw a person worth caring about. The walk to the shelter took longer than it should have because I kept slowing down whenever doubt crept up behind me, tapping on my shoulder like a nervous reminder that I had no idea what I was doing. The laminated card from Mrs. Bloom felt warm in my pocket even though the air was freezing. Each time I touched it, something steady unfurled inside me. It was the first time since leaving home that I carried anything that resembled direction. The shelter sat at the corner of a quiet street where small apartment buildings lined the sidewalks like tired soldiers. A soft yellow porch light glowed beside the entrance. I knocked hesitantly, wondering if I should have called first, when the door opened and a woman in her 40s stepped forward. Her hair was tied back neatly, and her expression held a mix of caution and compassion. "You must be Maddie," she said. Miss B called ahead. "Come in quickly, dear. It is too cold to be standing outside." Relief rushed through me, and I stepped inside. The hallway was warm and smelled faintly of laundry detergent. She introduced herself as Kara and explained the rules quietly. No alcohol, no drugs, no guests, but plenty of support if I needed it. She handed me a clipboard with forms and gave me a small tour. The common room had mismatched couches and a television someone had muted. The kitchen held shelves lined with donated groceries and plastic containers labeled with dates. At the end of the hallway was a bedroom with 2 twin beds. She gestured to the empty one and said, "This will be yours for now." I sat on the mattress, feeling the unfamiliar softness beneath me. It was not home, but it was safe. That safety alone felt like luxury. Kara left me to settle in, and I placed my meager belongings on the nightstand. I stared at the ceiling for a moment, letting myself breathe in long, even pulls because my lungs had forgotten how to expand fully. I fell asleep faster than I expected and woke several hours later to the sound of faint footsteps and the murmur of voices in the hallway. It took a moment to remember where I was. Then the memory of last night hit me all at once. Gavin's celebration, my mother's grip, my father's rage, and the cold walk to the bus stop. The pain came rushing back, but it no longer felt like a tidal wave threatening to pull me under. It felt like something I could stand through if I tried hard enough. I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes, and forced myself out of bed because lying there too long made the room tilt with old fears. I walked to the kitchen where a few women were eating breakfast. Kara handed me a cup of tea and asked if I was feeling rested. I nodded because admitting I had slept better here in one night than in my own house for years made my throat tighten. She suggested I check the community board in the lobby where job listings and local programs were pinned. I thanked her and wandered over, reading each flyer carefully. My gaze landed on a bright green sheet advertising openings at a small cafe downtown. Experience preferred, but not necessary. Apply in person. I tore off one of the tabs and tucked it into my pocket. After breakfast, I walked to the cafe on trembling legs. The front windows were fogged from the heat inside, and the smell of roasted coffee drifted through the doorway as soon as I pushed it open. A woman with curly hair tied in a scarf greeted me warmly. "Can I help you?" My voice shook slightly as I said, "I am here about the job." She smiled and handed me an application, then gestured toward a table near the window. "Fill this out and let me know when you are done." I wrote slowly, careful not to miss anything. When I was finished, she glanced over it and said, "Our manager can speak with you now." The interview was short. The manager was a tall man named Sean who asked simple questions and listened without interrupting. When he asked why I left home, I hesitated, but he nodded gently and said, "You do not have to share more than you want to." That small kindness felt like permission to breathe again. At the end of the conversation, he said we could use someone reliable. "Can you start tomorrow?" Relief flooded me. "Yes," I said quickly. "Thank you." When I stepped back outside, the cold air felt different. Sharper, but somehow refreshing. I checked my phone and saw the battery was down to 7%, but I ignored it. I walked back to the shelter with a lightness in my steps. Kara smiled when I told her I had a job. "See," she said, "you are stronger than you think." The next day, I began work. The cafe was small but busy with regulars who smiled at me kindly and gave tips even when all I did was refill their cups. I liked the rhythm of it, the clinking mugs, the hiss of the espresso machine, the small conversations about weather or morning traffic. I liked feeling useful without feeling invisible. After each shift, I returned to the shelter exhausted but proud. That first week blurred into something steady. I saved every dollar I could, placing bills carefully into a small envelope under my pillow. By the end of the second week, I had enough to look for a room to rent. I asked Kara for help, and she connected me with Mrs. Lane, an elderly woman who rented out her basement to students and young workers. The rent was cheap, and the space was clean with a small kitchenette and a window that let in slivers of morning light. I moved in with my backpack and the few clothes I had. Standing in the empty room, I felt something unfamiliar spreading inside me. Independence. Not forced independence like the kind my parents had wrapped in silence and expectations. Real independence. Chosen. Earned. My first night in that basement apartment, I made myself a bowl of instant noodles and sat on the floor eating slowly while the heater hummed in the corner. It was nothing special, yet it felt like a celebration. For the first time in my life, I had a place that belonged only to me. No one knocking on my door. No one telling me to smile. No one reminding me to be grateful for what I got. I fell asleep that night with a blanket pulled to my chin and a rare feeling drifting through my chest. Hope. And this time, it did not feel small or fragile. It felt like something beginning. For a while, it almost felt like the world had loosened its grip on my throat. I woke each morning in the basement apartment warm beneath a blanket that smelled faintly of detergent and lavender. I walked to the cafe in the crisp air and served customers who called me sweetheart or honey without meaning anything cruel. I came home tired in the good way, the way that meant I had earned my exhaustion rather than having it forced on me. I started my certification classes for nursing assistants in the evenings and studied at a small desk Mrs. Lane had given me. For the first time in my life, my days belonged to me, not to my parents' expectations or Gavin's shine or the silence that used to smother me. But peace has a way of drawing out the past like a faint bruise resurfacing. It was a Tuesday evening when the first email came. My phone dinged softly while I was studying blood pressure techniques. At first, I ignored it, focusing on the textbook. When the second notification followed closely behind, something uneasy stirred inside me. I tapped my screen and saw an email from my community college with the subject line, "FAFSA status altered." My chest tightened. I opened the message slowly as if bracing for impact. It read, "Your financial aid application has been placed on temporary hold pending confirmation of withdrawal request." Withdrawal request. I had never submitted anything like that. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through the details. Attached was a note. "Per recent communication from your parent, we were informed that you are taking time off due to personal instability and will reapply next semester." My heart slammed against my rib cage. Personal instability. The phrase burned. My throat closed around a mix of disbelief and anger. They were trying to sabotage me. Again. I pushed my chair back so quickly it scraped against the floor and startled Mrs. Lane, who had been reading in the living room. "You all right, dear?" she called gently. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Yes, just a school issue." She nodded and returned to her book, unaware that the world I had built these past weeks suddenly felt fragile. I sank back into my chair and read the email again, just to make sure I had not imagined the words. But they were there, staring back at me, cold and deliberate. I checked my voicemail next. 3 missed calls, 2 from an unknown number, 1 from my mother. My stomach twisted as I pressed play. Her voice came through soft and trembling in that familiar way she used whenever she was performing sadness for an audience. "Maddie, honey, we heard you enrolled in some program without telling us. We are worried. You are not thinking clearly. Come home so we can help you." The message lingered with a forced sigh before ending. I set the phone down, feeling heat rise in my face. Help me. They wanted control, not clarity. And they were not worried about my well-being. They were worried about losing the ability to direct my future. My phone buzzed again. A text this time from an unknown number. "Heard you ran away to punish your parents. You should be ashamed." I stared at the message, stunned. Someone from our church group, maybe. Or a relative who believed whatever story my parents had spun. Another message followed. "You need to come home and apologize. Your mother is humiliated." The words hammered against my skull until something inside me snapped into place. I took a long, slow breath and whispered out loud, "No." Just that one word. No. I opened my laptop and typed a response to the financial aid office explaining everything. I wrote that I had not withdrawn. I wrote that I was living independently. I wrote that no one had permission to act on my behalf. I attached the required documents and requested a lock on my student account. When I hit send, my hands still trembled, but not from fear. From anger that felt like ignition. The next morning, another email came. This one from my old high school guidance counselor. She asked if I was really taking time off and if everything was all right at home, because my mother had contacted her too. I stared at the words, feeling the last thread of disbelief unravel. They were still trying to script my story, still trying to shape the world around me to match their version of events. I typed back quickly. I left because home was not safe. Please do not make changes to anything about me unless I request it myself. She replied within minutes, saying she understood and would update my file to restrict parental involvement. The relief was so sudden I had to sit down, but the messages kept coming. A relative wrote, "Your mom is devastated. Your dad says you have always been dramatic. Gavin has been so worried." Another said, "Be grateful for the family God gave you. Not everyone gets that." I wanted to scream. Grateful for what? Silence, dismissal, fear. Being erased from my own birthday. My phone buzzed again, and I nearly threw it across the room. Instead, I opened the message. It was from my mother. "Maddie, come home. We can fix this as a family. We know you are struggling. Please do not embarrass us further." I read that last line twice. Not embarrass us further. It told me everything I needed to know. My leaving had not broken their hearts. It had broken their narrative. I turned off my phone and placed it face down on the table. My hands were shaking, but my breathing was steady. Mrs. Lane walked into the room and paused when she saw my expression. "Rough day, sweetheart." I nodded. "Want some tea?" she asked. The kindness nearly undid me. "Yes, please." She brewed a cup and set it beside me before walking away without prying. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. The messages had shaken me more than I wanted to admit, but underneath the fear, something stronger curled like a growing flame. I was no longer that girl standing in the hallway with a plate of leftover cake. I was building a life, a real one, and I was not going to let them ruin it. Not again. The messages from my family slowed down after a few days, but the tension they left behind settled into my stomach like a stone that refused to dissolve. I focused on work and school and the quiet steadiness of my new life. Yet there was always an undercurrent of dread that reminded me my parents had not given up. They never surrendered control without a fight. I did not know when the next wave would hit, but I knew it was coming. It arrived in the form of a text from Gavin. It was short, barely a sentence, but it carried enough weight to stop my breath. "Mom and Dad are planning something for me." I stared at the message, unsure whether to respond or let the silence answer for me. Before I could decide, another text appeared. "It is a signing day celebration. They are inviting everyone." My heartbeat quickened as I read the words signing day. I remembered how important that event was in our town. When star athletes made their college commitments, the whole community turned it into a spectacle. Photos, banners, speeches, and sometimes even newspaper articles. Gavin had always dreamed of being the center of one. Of course, our parents would use it. It was exactly their style. They would gather everyone who mattered to them and deliver the version of our story they wanted people to believe. That I was unstable, that I had run away impulsively, that they were patient, forgiving parents dealing with a difficult daughter. I asked Gavin, "Why are you telling me this?" He replied after a long pause, "Because they want to use me for the story again." I asked what he meant, and the next message arrived slowly, as if he had typed it several times before sending. "They want me to give a speech about family strength and how they never gave up on you." My throat tightened. It was so like them to twist abandonment into devotion. I imagined the scene easily. My parents standing proudly before a crowd while Gavin recited lines my mother had rehearsed with him. Something about forgiveness. Something about loyalty. Something about how I would come home once I realized I was wrong. The thought filled me with heat that pulsed through my chest like a second heartbeat. I typed one question. "Are you going to do it?" Gavin replied, "I do not know." I stared at the message for a long moment, wondering whether he understood what it meant to even consider helping them rewrite my life. Before I could ask anything else, he texted, "They are inviting church groups, neighbors, extended family." Everyone. My hands shook slightly as I read the list. Those were the people who had always believed my parents' version of things, even when their stories had cracks. People who had seen Gavin praised and me pushed aside and assumed everything was fine because we looked normal from a distance. If my parents controlled the narrative now, they would shape the truth into something even harder to undo. That night, I lay awake staring at the dark ceiling of my basement room while the old heater buzzed in the corner. I thought about Gavin at the center of another celebration, basking in applause while my absence became part of a story that painted me as the villain. I thought about my mother squeezing my wrist, whispering, "Do not ruin this," and how easily she wielded guilt like a weapon. I replayed my father slamming his hand near my head, his voice cold and sharp. I remembered the leftover cake, the crooked card, and the silence that swallowed my birthday. The ache in my chest grew heavier until something clicked into place. They wanted to shape the story. They wanted to perform forgiveness. They wanted to parade their version of family in front of the community, but they did not get to decide the truth. Not anymore. The next day at the cafe, I wiped down tables with more force than necessary while replaying Gavin's messages in my mind. Sean, the manager, noticed my expression and asked if everything was all right. I said yes, even though the tension in my jaw said otherwise. After my shift, I sat in the corner booth during the quiet hours and pulled out my notebook, the same one where I kept goals, quotes, and fragments of thoughts that sometimes helped me make sense of things. I wrote down the facts. My parents were hosting a signing day party. They were inviting people who believed them easily. They wanted Gavin to speak, and they wanted to reshape my leaving into their triumph. Then I wrote something else. I cannot let them. The idea did not come all at once. It came in pieces like fragments of glass that finally aligned into a clear window. I needed to tell my own story. Calmly, clearly, truthfully. Not to attack them, but to reclaim the voice they kept trying to silence. I remembered what Mrs. Bloom had said. "You do not look broken. You look abandoned." I held on to that sentence like an anchor in rough water. After dinner, I called my Aunt Denise, the only relative who had reached out sincerely after I left. She picked up almost immediately and said, "Maddie, I was hoping you would call." I told her about the signing day party. Everything. The invitations, the planned speech, the lies they were preparing. When I finished, she exhaled sharply. "I knew something felt off when your mother posted about a big event coming up," she said. "They are rewriting the story again." Her voice held a mix of frustration and protective anger that made my eyes burn. I asked quietly, "What am I supposed to do?" She paused before saying the words that became the spark I needed. "You tell the truth before they do, not to them, to everyone else." I felt something steady rise in me. a strange confidence that I had not felt since leaving home. I asked if she would help. Her yes came without hesitation. Whatever you need. Over the next few days, we planned carefully. She gathered the list of guests from someone in the church group who still liked her enough to gossip. I created a timeline of what my parents had done, including the FAFSA sabotage, the messages, and the night of my birthday. I printed screenshots. I kept the leftover birthday card tucked in a folder, even though looking at it made my stomach twist. I replayed the voicemail my mother had left weeks earlier, the one where she pretended to be heartbroken instead of manipulative. With Denise's help, I wrote a letter that explained the truth plainly without cruelty. It was not a rant. It was not a plea. It was a statement of facts. They did not forget my birthday. They celebrated a holiday around my brother instead. They dismissed my voice. They tried to sabotage my education. They lied about why I left, and I left to be safe, not dramatic. The more I wrote, the stronger I felt. When I finished, Denise read it aloud over the phone and said, "This is powerful. People need to see it." I asked if she was sure. I did not want to drag her into the aftermath, but she said something that made the guilt ease. "Your story deserves air. Truth dies in silence." I made a short video too, sitting in my basement room. I spoke softly but steadily. I did not cry. I did not yell. I simply said I left because I could not stay in a place that refused to see me. I said I was safe and working and building a life. I said I did not want pity, only truth. When I finished recording, I watched the video once and felt something inside me settle. It was the first time I had ever heard myself speak from a place of strength. Denise printed 60 copies of the letter and attached a small QR code linking to the video. She tucked them into envelopes. Then she told me the plan. She would attend the signing day party. She would greet people as usual, and she would slip the letters into the hands of those who needed to know the truth. I agreed, even though my heart pounded. I would not be there. I did not need to be. My truth would show up without me. The morning of the event, I walked to the cafe for my shift, feeling both lighter and heavier. Hope and fear mingled inside me like two tides colliding. I spent the hours wiping counters, pouring drinks, and checking the time. I imagined the party unfolding, the decorations, the speeches, the moment the first envelope was opened. By evening, my hands shook slightly whenever I held a cup. Sean asked if I needed a break, and I nodded. I stepped outside into the cold air and stared at the pale winter sky. Everything felt suspended, waiting. When my phone finally buzzed, I nearly dropped it. A text from Denise. "It is done." Another message followed a moment later. "People are talking." A third. "Your parents look stunned." My breath left my lungs in a rush, as if someone had opened a window inside my chest. I waited for her to say more. Then the fourth message came. "Maddie, it worked." When Denise texted that the signing day party had erupted into whispered confusion and cracked expressions, I felt something inside me shift in a way that was both terrifying and liberating. But it had not happened by chance. It happened because I had spent days gathering every thread of truth they had tried so carefully to hide. The gathering of evidence had started long before Denise walked into that event. It began the moment I realized my parents were not just neglectful, but strategic about controlling my narrative. I had seen glimpses of it for years, the way my mother would smooth over arguments with soft smiles and quiet lies, the way my father would charm neighbors with stories that painted him as a dedicated parent. But the sabotage of my FAFSA was the moment that broke the last illusion. That night after school, I sat at my small desk in the basement room and pulled out the folder where I kept everything related to my new life. I added a new label at the top of a blank sheet. Proof. It felt strange and strangely empowering. I started with what I already had. The leftover birthday card still creased from where my mother had shoved it into my hand. The words, "Be grateful for what you get," still scratched across the cheap paper. I held it gently, as if it were a piece of fragile evidence from a crime scene. I placed it in the folder. Then came the photo of the Thanksgiving table, the one I had snapped half accidentally when I walked in that night, hoping for something resembling warmth. In the picture, my family stood around the table smiling for a holiday photo my mother had staged. Gavin holding the carving knife, my mother tilting her head just so, my father smiling stiffly, that politician smile he saved for outsiders, and me barely visible in the corner, blurred almost ghost-like. I printed that photo and set it next to the card. Then I opened my phone and scrolled through messages, old ones from my mother, from my father, from relatives from church. I screenshotted everything that hinted at manipulation, from the guilt-laced texts to the ones insisting I had run away for attention to the cruel message from the unknown sender telling me to apologize and stop humiliating my family. One by one, I saved them, labeled them, and printed them at the library. Each page that spat out of the printer felt like another piece of armor layered onto me. When I returned home that night, I spread everything across my desk and looked at it the way detectives do in movies, laying out a timeline. But this was not fiction. This was my life. I began arranging everything chronologically: the birthday photo, the leftover card, the messages from relatives after I left, the FAFSA email, the voicemail where my mother pretended to be heartbroken. There was a moment while organizing it when I had to stop because my chest tightened in a way that felt like drowning. All this time, I thought I had exaggerated their behavior because that was what they always told me. You are too sensitive, you overreact, you take things too seriously. But seeing everything laid out on paper made the truth undeniable. They had erased me in 100 small ways long before I walked out of the house that night. The next step was recording the video. It took me 3 days to gather the courage. I kept turning the idea over in my head, imagining how my face would look, how my voice would sound, how people would react. At first, I was scared that my voice would shake, that I would cry, that the world would see me as weak. But then one evening, after a long shift at the cafe, I sat down at the desk, took a deep breath, positioned my phone on a stack of textbooks, and pressed record. The first attempt was terrible. I rambled. I choked on my own words. I deleted it immediately. The second attempt was better, but I still felt myself slipping into the apologetic tone my mother had trained me to use. I deleted it. On the third attempt, something clicked. I did not rehearse. I did not filter myself. I simply spoke. I said I left because the house did not feel like a home. I said I had been invisible for years. I said I was working, studying, and surviving. I said no one had the right to speak for me anymore. When I finished, I hit stop and sat there staring at the screen for what felt like an entire hour. I watched the recording once. My voice was steady. My eyes were clear. There was sadness, but not desperation. There was strength, but not cruelty. It was enough. I uploaded the video privately and saved the link. The next part required help. I met with Denise at a small diner halfway between my city and hers. She arrived bundled in a winter coat with her hair frizzing from the cold. When she slid into the booth, she reached across the table and held my hand for a moment. "You look stronger," she said gently. I felt stronger. We went through the folder together. She read every page with a thoughtful frown and kept whispering "unbelievable" or "they really did this" under her breath. When she finished, she looked at me with a mix of fury and pride. "This is enough to show anyone what actually happened." I nodded, though my throat tightened. Together, we crafted the letter. It needed to be simple, clear, and calm. Not emotional, not accusing, not dramatic. Just the truth. It took 3 hours and 2 cups of coffee. We wrote about the Thanksgiving birthday and how they celebrated Gavin while ignoring me. We wrote about how I left because I had no support at home. We wrote about the FAFSA sabotage and the messages they spread about me. We wrote that I had built a life and that I deserved respect, even if they would never give it. After the letter was finished, Denise printed 60 copies at a print shop. She added the QR code with the video link at the bottom. The woman at the counter asked if we were running some sort of event. Denise smiled and said something like that. When we left the shop, the winter wind hit us like a slap. Denise handed me 1 copy of the letter. "The rest are for them," she said, meaning the guests at the party. I held the letter tightly, feeling the weight of my own story in my hands. On the drive back, she said, "I am proud of you. No one escapes a family like that without strength." Her words stayed with me long after she dropped me off. That night, I tucked the folder back into my desk drawer. It was ready. The truth was ready. I was ready. The day of Gavin's signing day party arrived wrapped in a brittle winter cold that made the air feel sharper than usual, as if even the sky expected something to break. I woke early and sat on the edge of my narrow bed, listening to the old heater breathe unevenly against the wall. There was a quietness in the room that reminded me of the moments before a storm, the eerie stillness when the world seems to inhale. Today was not about confrontation. It was about revelation, the truth moving through a space my parents had never wanted it to enter. Denise texted me before breakfast, "Leaving now." I could almost picture her locking her front door, pulling her coat tight, carrying the stack of envelopes that held the story they had tried to bury. I thanked her again, and she responded with a small message that read, "I am doing this because it matters." I carried that message with me as I walked to the cafe for my shift. I went through the motions, pouring coffee, wiping counters, greeting customers, but my mind kept drifting back to my parents' house, to the decorated room, to the carefully arranged tables, to the crowd they had curated. I imagined the smell of roasted meats and sweet potatoes and cinnamon candles arranged by my mother to make the house look warm and welcoming. I imagined the neighbors already arriving with their smiles and church friends taking pictures and Gavin adjusting the collar of his Letterman jacket as people praised him. Above everything, I imagined my parents standing proudly rehearsing the speech that would paint them as victims of a difficult daughter who had lost her way. They had always been excellent performers. The idea made my chest tighten, but not with fear, exactly more with anticipation. Around noon, the cafe slowed enough for me to slip into the back room for my break. I checked my phone again. No updates from Denise yet. My stomach churned, but I reminded myself that the plan was simple. She would greet people as she always did, smiling warmly, chatting casually, then quietly passing envelopes into hands at the bar or near the entryway or at the food table. She would place a few among the stack of programs the church group had printed for the event. She would move calmly and confidently so no one would suspect anything until it was too late. I trusted her more than I trusted anyone I had ever known. When my break ended, I returned to the counter, but my mind was not in the room. The minutes stretched into hours until the end of my shift finally arrived. I stepped outside the cafe and felt the cold wind sting my face. I wrapped my scarf tighter and walked slowly toward the bus stop. The sky was pale gray, stretched thin like paper. I kept checking my phone even though I knew Denise would text when she could. By the time I reached my stop, my hands were trembling. Not from the cold, but from the tension twisting inside me. When the bus arrived, I climbed aboard, found a seat near the back, and stared out the window at the passing streets. I barely remembered the ride. My mind kept creating images of the party replaying possible reactions. Would my parents explode immediately? Would they try to claim the letters were fabricated? Would anyone believe them? Would Gavin defend them or stay silent? Or would he walk away again? My phone buzzed just as the bus pulled into my neighborhood. Denise. The message read, "It has begun." My knees weakened and I had to grip the seat in front of me to steady myself. I stepped off the bus and stood still on the sidewalk for a moment, the air stinging my nose. I opened the message fully. Guests are reading, whispering, confusion everywhere. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. I took a few steps down the street, unable to stop staring at the screen. Another message arrived. Your mother saw one of the letters. Her face went white. I closed my eyes for a moment. It was happening. The truth was moving through their world like a quiet fuse burning toward something inevitable. I walked slowly toward my basement apartment, but another text came before I reached the door. A man approached your father holding the letter. He asked him if it was true that they forgot your 18th birthday. Your father looked furious. I felt a jolt behind my ribs. Not triumph exactly, but something close to clarity. They had built their reputation on curated impressions. Kindness performed for others, approval crafted like a badge of honor. And now that facade was cracking. I entered the basement apartment and removed my coat slowly, almost reverently. The room felt smaller suddenly, as if the air had thickened with expectation. I sat on my bed and waited. Another text. People are asking questions. They are not buying their explanations. Her next message came seconds later. Your mother is crying loudly. Your father is raising his voice. The pastor asked them to step aside. My breath tightened. I imagined my mother clutching her chest as she often did when she wanted sympathy. I imagined my father trying to look calm while anger burned under his skin. I imagined the pastor stern-faced with quiet disappointment. Then a new message arrived. Gavin just walked out of the room. Something in that sentence made me grip the edge of the bed. I knew that walk. I knew that expression Gavin wore when the pressure became too much. He had always been good at performing the golden sun, but even golden suns have limits. I typed, "Is he okay?" Denise responded, "He looks shaken. Give him time." I nodded even though she could not see me. I leaned back against the wall, the cool surface calming my heated skin. Another message flashed on my screen. "A woman confronted your mother directly. She asked why the cake in the Thanksgiving photo last year had the wrong date." I blinked. The cake. The one my mother had posted with the caption, "Grateful for my boys." She must have reused a photo or staged something false. The guests were noticing every inconsistency. Denise texted again. "Your father blamed the bakery." I let out a breath that was almost a laugh. It was so predictable that it was almost absurd. Blaming a bakery for a lie. Blaming everything but themselves. More messages followed rapidly like sparks flying. "A couple from church is asking about your FAFSA. They say the dates do not match. Another relative said they always wondered why you were never in any of the photos. Someone else said they noticed your mother cropped you out of last year's Christmas picture." And then the message that made everything inside me go still. "People are defending you." My eyes blurred for a moment. Defending me. Something I had never experienced in my own family. Denise continued. "They are saying they always sensed something was wrong. They are saying the way your parents talk about you never sounded right." I pressed my palm to my mouth, trying to stay composed. I felt something warm rise in my chest, a mix of relief and grief tangled together. Another message. "Your parents are trying to claim the letter is fake. Someone pointed out that the voicemail in the QR code has your mother's voice on it. They have no explanation." I felt a slow, steady heat spread through me. Not rage, not triumph. Something steadier. Justice, maybe. Denise wrote, "Your mother is saying she was taken out of context. No one believes her." Then a moment later, "Your father is accusing me of conspiring with you." I typed, "Are you okay?" She replied, "I am fine. They are embarrassed, not dangerous." Her final message made me exhale sharply. "The room is divided. Many people are leaving. Several came up to me saying they support you. It is done." I fell back against the mattress, letting the tension drain from my body all at once. The truth had done what truth always does when it finally breathes. It exposed the rot. I stared at the ceiling for a long time before sitting up again. My phone buzzed. Another text, but not from Denise, from Gavin. The message was simple and carried the weight of everything he had finally seen. "You did it." 2 words, but they cracked open something inside me. I typed back, "Are you okay?" He replied, "I needed to see it. All of it. Thank you for telling the truth." I stared at the screen and felt a tear slip down my face. Not a tear of hurt, a tear of release. I responded, "Take care of yourself." He replied, "I will." Silence settled, but it was not heavy. It felt clean. Hours passed in the soft quiet of my basement apartment. I ate dinner slowly, barely tasting it. I took a shower, letting the warm water run over me until the tension eased. I changed into pajamas and sat on the bed again, holding my phone loosely in my hand. The truth had detonated inside that house, not with explosions, but with calm, undeniable clarity. And once truth enters a room, it cannot be erased. Late that night, Denise called, not texted called, which she rarely did unless something significant had happened. When I answered, her voice was exhausted but triumphant. "Are you sitting?" she asked. I smiled slightly. "I am." She exhaled a long breath. "Your parents have left the event early. They looked shaken. People asked them to step down from several committees. They do not hold the same power anymore." I listened quietly, heart steady. She said, "And Maddie, people stood up for you today. People who used to believe them. They are saying things need to change. The world is seeing them differently." I pressed my hand to my chest, not sure whether the pressure I felt was pain or relief. Maybe both. Denise's voice softened. I am proud of you. You did not hurt them. You told the truth. And the truth did what it needed to do. When we hung up, I sat in silence, letting the words wrap around me slowly. My parents had tried to erase me. They had tried to control me. They had tried to script my life into a story that made them heroes. But now the story had been rewritten not by their voices, but by mine. And as I finally lay down and closed my eyes, a realization settled into me like warmth rising through cold bones. The truth had exploded, and I had survived the blast. The morning after the party carried a strange quietness, the kind that appears after a heavy snowfall, when everything feels muted and slightly unreal. I woke slowly, blinking at the soft light filtering through the tiny basement window, unsure at first why my chest felt lighter than it had in months. Then it rushed back to me in a warm, steady wave. The truth was out, not whispered, not questioned, not hidden beneath my parents' polished smiles. It was out. I lay still for several minutes, letting the weight of that settle until my phone buzzed beside me. For a split second, I expected another message from Denise, or maybe one more apology from someone who had seen the letters. Instead, the name on the screen made my breath hitch. Gavin. I sat up quickly, staring at the notification. He had sent only 2 words. Can we talk? My pulse quickened. I typed back, where? His response came almost immediately. I am near campus. Could we meet outside the bookstore? My throat tightened. I did not expect him to come here. I did not expect him to want to see me. I got dressed quickly, pulling on jeans and a thick sweater, then wrapped my scarf around my neck. The air outside was cold and crisp as I walked across campus, my boots crunching on patches of ice. Students hurried past with backpacks and coffee cups, but all the noise felt like it existed far away from me. As I approached the bookstore, I saw him before he saw me. Gavin stood near the bike rack, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, head bowed slightly. He looked younger than usual, not the golden boy in the spotlight, but a boy stripped of everything that once shielded him. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes met mine, and something unspoken passed between us. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes, jaw tense as if he had spent the entire night clenching it. I stopped a few feet away, unsure whether to move closer. He swallowed hard, then said in a quiet, shaky voice, Maddie. It was the first time he had used my name without sounding rehearsed. I nodded once, letting him choose the next step. He took a breath that seemed to steady him and said, I am sorry. The words hung between us raw and unpolished. Not the kind of apology our family gave, the kind coated in excuses and self-preservation. This one was real. His voice wavered as he continued, I should have stood up for you. I should have seen everything sooner. I should have said something when Mom and Dad tried to make you look like the problem. Every sentence cracked slightly, like something fragile inside him was breaking open. I listened silently, arms crossed more out of self-protection than anger. He rubbed the back of his neck and said, I think I knew for a long time that things were not fair, but I liked being the favorite. I liked the attention. I did not want to lose it, so I pretended. Hearing him say it out loud made my stomach twist. For years, I had wondered if Gavin ever sensed the imbalance, or if he simply floated above it unaware. Now I realized he had known, and he had chosen not to see me. I whispered, why now? He looked away, then back at me, eyes red-rimmed. Because yesterday I watched Mom lie to people she claims to love. I watched Dad yell at the pastor for asking a simple question. I watched them fall apart the second they lost control, and I realized that is what you lived with every day. A knife of recognition slid through me. He said the letters were hard to read, but the video that was what got me. You looked so calm, so steady, not broken, not dramatic, just honest, and I realized how much they twisted you into someone you were not. I felt heat sting the back of my eyes, but I refused to let it spill over. Not yet. Gavin stepped closer, though still giving me space. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not deserve it. But I want you to know that you were right, about all of it. Our parents care about appearances more than people. They care about winning more than listening. They care about Gavin the idea, not Gavin the person. He let out a shaky breath. That party was supposed to be about me, but the moment the letter spread, it felt like the whole room finally saw through them. I did too. His voice cracked on the last sentence. For the first time, I saw my brother not as the golden child, but as another person who had been shaped and manipulated in different ways to play a role. I asked softly, "What did you do after?" He looked down at his shoes. I left. Mom ran after me, but I kept walking. Dad kept trying to pull me back inside, saying we could fix it. But they did not want to fix anything. They wanted to control the story. He looked up at me again, eyes filled with something like grief. I do not want to be part of their story anymore. I let his words sink in. For years, I had begged silently for someone to notice the truth, for someone to choose me even once. And now he was standing here choosing to step out of the shadow he had lived so comfortably in. I exhaled slowly. "I am not going back, Gavin." He nodded immediately. "I know. I do not want you to. You are better without them." The sincerity in his voice shocked me. I asked then, "Why are you here?" He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled something out. My breath caught when I recognized it. The birthday card, the one that had felt like a slap disguised as a joke. But there was something new written beneath the original message, something in his handwriting. He held it out to me with trembling fingers. I wrote that after the party he said quietly. I read the new line. "I am sorry. I should have been more like you." My chest tightened painfully. I stared at the card, feeling years of hurt and longing wrap around me all at once. He whispered, "You did not deserve any of it, Maddie. None." I looked at him, then really looked at him. He was hurting in his own way, but he was trying. Not for our parents, not for appearances, for me. And that mattered. I finally said, "I forgive you, but I cannot go back to who I was." He nodded, tears sliding silently down his face. "I do not want you to," he whispered. I stepped forward and hugged him gently, letting the moment settle between us like a soft, fragile truce. When we pulled apart, he wiped his face and said, "Take care of yourself, okay?" I promised I would. He gave me one last small smile, then turned and walked across campus, disappearing slowly into the winter air. I stood there holding the card, feeling something inside me loosen at last. Not healed, but released. A chapter of pain quietly closing. The days after my conversation with Gavin felt different in a way I had trouble naming. Not lighter exactly, and not heavier either. It was more like the air around me had shifted into its rightful place, as if something that had been tilting for years had quietly settled level again. I kept the card he gave me on my desk for a night, not out of sentimentality, but because I needed to look at it once in the calm after everything. I needed to see the original cruel message and the handwritten apology beneath it as proof that even the deepest wounds can be witnessed honestly once the fog lifts. The next morning, without ceremony, I dropped it into the metal trash can outside my dorm building. The sound was soft but final. I walked to class with a warm cup of coffee in my hands, breathing in the cold morning air, and for the first time since leaving home, I felt something close to ownership of my life. My days became fuller as the semester unfolded. Classes challenged me in ways that made my brain buzz. My instructors noticed my effort and called on me often. At the writing center, I helped freshmen craft their narratives, and every time one of them said thank you or that makes sense, something inside me glowed in a quiet way. It was ironic. I had never been given space to speak at home, yet now I was helping others find their voices. Evenings in the dorm were loud and messy in the way only college buildings can be, with music drifting through thin walls and doors slamming and the smell of microwave popcorn in every hallway. Gabe became a constant in my routine, showing up with snacks or asking if I wanted to take a walk or forcing me to watch movies to decompress. One evening, he glanced at me over a bowl of noodles and said, "You seem happier." I paused, realizing he was right. The happiness was not loud or ecstatic. It was steady. It lived in the way I woke without dread and went to sleep without replaying old wounds. It lived in the way I planned my future and did not feel guilty for imagining myself in it. A few weeks later, I had a meeting with the financial aid office to finalize my status as an independent student. I handed them the documents I had carefully gathered letters from Denise and my counselor, proof of my income, and my lease. The administrator read everything with a thoughtful expression and finally looked up with a small, encouraging smile. "You have done everything properly," she said. "You are officially independent. Congratulations." A simple sentence, but it felt like receiving a key to a door I had not known existed. After leaving the office, I stood outside for a long time, letting the winter sunlight warm my face. I was no longer tethered to people who tried to diminish me. I was no longer waiting for approval that would never come. I was no longer the girl standing in a snowy driveway whispering, "It is my birthday," into a silent, cold night. Word spread slowly through the extended family about what had happened at the signing day party. People reached out occasionally with cautious messages. Some apologized. Some asked if I was all right. A few said they wished they had known earlier. I responded politely to most, but kept my distance. I was not interested in reopening the past. I was building forward, not backward. As for my parents, I heard little from them directly. A few emails attempted to reach me, but they were coded in vagueness and crafted sadness, the kind that avoids accountability. I ignored them. I had spent too many years bending myself into shapes to fit their version of reality. I was done shrinking. I was done explaining. I was done offering access to anyone who would only use it to wound me again. Spring approached, slowly melting the stubborn patches of snow on the sidewalks. The air grew warmer and campus buzzed with a new kind of energy. One afternoon, as I walked across the quad, I paused near a group of blossoming trees and let the breeze brush against my face. I felt rooted for the first time, not to a house or a family, but to myself. I was choosing my life deliberately, not out of obligation, but out of hope. I began preparing for my nursing program, which accepted me with a full scholarship. The welcome packet arrived in the mail, and I held it with a mixture of awe and pride. Every decision that had brought me here, every painful step, every lonely night, had led to something grounded and real. On the night before my orientation, I sat at my small desk and opened a fresh notebook. On the first page, I wrote a sentence that came to me without effort. "You survived because your story deserved another chapter." I closed the notebook gently and turned off the light, feeling a sense of peace that reached all the way to the edges of my breath. Before going to sleep, I thought of Gavin. His apology had not erased the past, but it had softened something inside me, the sharpness of betrayal, the ache of being unseen. I hoped he found his own path separate from the roles our parents had built around him. I hoped he found his voice the way I had found mine. The final tie to my parents loosened naturally over time, not in dramatic fights or explosive endings, but in the absence of their presence in my life. They faded the way shadows fade when you step into brighter light. One evening, after a long study session, I walked outside and watched the sun disappearing behind the buildings, the sky painted in soft oranges and purples. A feeling washed over me, gentle and sure. Freedom. Not the loud, triumphant kind, but the kind that slips into your bones quietly. The kind that feels like choosing yourself without apology. As I walked back toward my dorm, one thought settled clearly in my mind. Revenge was never about destroying them. It was about releasing myself. And I had. I was living proof that healing is not a return to what hurt you, but a journey away from it toward something stronger, toward yourself. If you stayed with me until the very end of this story, then you already know why voices like mine matter and why stories like this one cannot stay in the dark. Somewhere out there, another daughter, another son, another quiet kid at the end of a long dinner table is swallowing their own pain because someone taught them their suffering was an inconvenience. Somewhere another 18-year-old is blowing out an invisible candle, wondering why the people who were supposed to love them the most never learned how to see them. And if you felt even a flicker of anger, sadness, recognition, or hope while listening, then this is the moment I ask you for something simple but powerful. Do not let this story end when the video stops. Share it. Talk about it. Send it to someone who needs to hear that walking away from cruelty is not betrayal, but survival. Your share might be the message that helps someone else take their first step towards safety. If this story resonated with your own experiences, if it shook something loose inside you, if it made you whisper, "That was me" under your breath, then leave a comment and tell us whatever you feel comfortable sharing. You never know who you might help by speaking up. There are people right here in this community who carry decades of bruises, emotional or otherwise, who survived childhood homes filled with fear instead of warmth. When you share your truth, you become the hand reaching back to pull the next person out of the dark. And if you found strength or validation, or just a moment of peace in these words, make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss a story that reminds you that your voice, the one someone once tried to silence, is still alive and still yours. This channel is not just a place for dramatic twists and family secrets exposed. It is a space where the unheard finally get a microphone, where every viewer becomes part of a community that refuses to pretend that toxic families are normal. Here we say the quiet parts out loud. Here we protect the ones who grew up unprotected. Here we remind each other that healing is not only possible, but earned. And if you want to support our work, the easiest way is simply engaging. Like the video. Leave a comment, even if it is just to say you are here and listening. Share the video with a friend or a family member who needs to know they are not alone. Engagement tells the algorithm that these stories matter, that these experiences are real, and that the people who lived through them deserve to be heard. And if you have your own story, one that has been sitting heavy inside you for years, maybe decades, this is your invitation. Tell it. Either here in the comments or privately if that feels safer. Your story will not be dismissed here. Your pain will not be minimized here. Your truth will not be twisted the way so many of ours were by the people who wanted to control us. And before you go, take a moment to breathe and remember this. You did not imagine the hurt. You did not deserve the silence. You were not wrong to want love that felt real. And if you walked away from a home that broke you, you did not destroy your family. You saved yourself. If this story gave you even a sliver of hope or clarity, then do not forget to follow for more. Because every week, we shine a light on stories that could have been yours or mine or your neighbors or your childhood best friends. Stories where justice does not come in fireworks but in quiet strength and steady healing. Stories where survivors are not just characters, they are proof that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply walk toward your own life.